Teachers Retirement Board approved the multi-year internal investment management plan and the 2021-22 operating budget at the November meeting. The board approved the plan for $40.9 million to establish 109 authorized positions and funding for external investment audit services dispersed across fiscal years 2021, 22 through 2025, 26. I do not see any captions. The plan is a 5-year resource strategy to continue successful implementation efforts and growth of the CalSTRS collaborative model and manage growth of assets through under management. The collaborative model is an investment strategy to manage more assets internally to reduce cost, control portfolio risk, and increase investment returns. I see testing 2021, 22. I see captions.
Okay, yeah, hers are that was Myra. She's
of the collaborative model, which we estimate may reduce investment costs between 200 and 300 million on average. Of the collaborative model, which we estimate may reduce investment costs between 200 and 300 million on average.
And we're live.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the CalSTRS board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask our staff to take the roll, please.
Great. Ms. Bradford?
Here.
Ms. Hendricks?
Here.
Ms. Higa?
Here.
Mr. Prezant?
Here.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Here.
Ms. Whitaker for the Director of Finance?
Here.
Mr. Ruffino for the State Treasurer?
Present. The treasurer will be joining momentarily. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Okay. And I think that is it. So, Mr. Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Rosalind. Good morning again, everyone, and happy holidays to all that are in attendance and anyone that's watching live stream. Wishing you and your families a happy holiday and certainly a healthy one. Means more this year than any year, of course. So thinking of all of you and our staff in particular. Thank you, Rosalind. So our meetings are live streamed and we take comments from the public. So these comments are live streamed, and if any of the members of the public that do speak are under 18 years of age, we do not record their comments. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to approve this morning's agenda. It's been moved by Karen.
I'll second.
And seconded by Joy. Without objection, the agenda has been approved.
Okay, great.
Brings us to item 2, which is an item on a board-sponsored legislation. This item will be presented by staff. We will then hear from public comments, and then the board will have discussion. For this item, there will be 30 minutes allocated for public comments, with no more than 3 minutes per speaker. Staff person presenting this item is Jocelyn Martinez-Wade. Jocelyn?
Morning, everyone. Joycelyn Martinez-Wade, Director of Governmental Relations. I have one.
Good morning, Joycelyn.
Good morning. I have one proposal to bring to you this morning for consideration as board-sponsored legislation. And this proposal addresses the recovery of overpaid benefits and how our statute of limitation interacts with those collections. And the main change that it proposes is equity in situations when member error or member fraud are not the cause of the overpayment. So in instances where an employer error has caused the overpayment, instead of what happens under current law, which in general we collect the full amount from the member if we begin that collection within 3 years of discovery, this proposal aligns the collection with instances of system error by collecting the 3 most recent years from the member and the balance from the employer. Under current law with system error, the 3 most recent years are collected from the member and the balance is unrecoverable.
Joycelyn?
Yes.
Joycelyn, I so apologize for interrupting you, but I did see that Controller Yee's hand was up in the corner here, and I missed it. So, Betty?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was not included in the roll call, and I just had to get off the video for a moment to sneeze. But there may have been some other members that also were not called during the roll call.
Yeah, I can take your names, but I did note that the additional members were present.
Great. Okay.
On the screen, but I did note that you were present.
Also.
Thank you.
Fiona.
Okay.
Okay. And
Thank
I saw Jennifer and Mr. Yamanaka and
Mr. Chair, my principal, the treasurer, is also on the line.
Great. Thanks. I think we've captured everyone at this point, and I appreciate that. And
thank you.
Of course. Joycelyn, back to you.
Thank you. One of the other changes in the proposal is that it extends the time frame to commence collection in cases of member fraud from 3 years to 10 years, since that's an egregious situation. And I think importantly, and just the last thing I want to note about the proposal specifically, is that it clarifies our statute of limitation, which currently as it's written in law is very confusing as it applies to actions by or against the system versus the collections we're talking about, by clearly separating those statutes, those provisions in our statute. And so I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. The next thing I want to address is the feedback we've been receiving from stakeholders. We've been engaging in discussions with stakeholders for several months. We've received quite a bit of feedback, so I just want to summarize that at a high level, with member groups in general being concerned about benefits changing after retirement and the collection coming from the member of the overpaid benefit when that overpayment was through no fault of that member's. The employer groups that we've spoken with are concerned about taking on the additional liability, as I mentioned, that beyond the 3 most recent years, we would be looking to the employer to pay back the rest of the overpayment if it's lasted beyond that point in time. And I think in general, amongst all of the groups, we've heard a call for consistent guidance and training on the front end regarding reporting to avoid overpayments and collections in the end. And so I think I'll stop my summary there. And if there's questions for me, then I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. Then why don't we go to public comments at this point, and after public comments, we'll have board member questions and comments. So if the staff could queue up the members of the public. As a reminder, there will be a total of 30 minutes allocated for public comments for this item, with no member of the public speaking for more than 3 minutes. I'll turn it over to our staff to recognize the members of the public. Thank you.
Harry, there are 14 members of the public in the queue. Would you like to designate how much time each member gets?
Thank you. So you said 14?
Correct. Oh, 15, I'm sorry.
15, well, that's 30 divided by 15. That will be 2 minutes each. Thank you.
Just give us 1 minute to get the timer up, and then we'll start.
Not a problem. Thanks. So I would ask that the members of the public please abide by the 2-minute rule for each person. We've increased the allotted time for public comments for this item from 10 minutes to 30 minutes, knowing that there's a lot of public comments, but we really ask that you respect the 2 minutes per person. So I'll turn it over to the staff to facilitate the members of the public's comments. Thank you.
Okay. Our first public comment comes from Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Good morning, CalSTRS board members. My name is Kevin Welch, and I am the Vice Chair of the Retirement Committee for the California Teachers Association. CTA appreciates the work done by the CalSTRS staff regarding the proposed legislation regarding the recovery of overpayments. CTA believes that once a member is retired, that they should not have their retirement benefit reduced for any reason that is not their fault. While we are supportive of the proposed intent of the legislation, we can also not lose sight of the bigger picture of why changes to retirement benefits occur. Whether it is through CalSTRS error, employer error, or other reasons outside of the member's control, we must strive to provide our members and retirees peace of mind when their decision and timing of retirement are in part determined by the retirement estimates they receive from CalSTRS. Lastly, we must understand and acknowledge that any potential impact on a member's benefit can be catastrophic for the impacted retirees. While this proposal does not go as far as we would like, we do believe that it is a step in the right direction. Thank you for your consideration of these comments, and we look forward to partnering with CalSTRS and other stakeholders on this potential legislation and the bigger picture work being done to solidify the retirement system for our members. Thank you for your time. I wish each of you a very happy and healthy holiday season.
Your comment? We'll wait for the timer to come back up, and then we'll bring the next caller in. Okay, our next caller is Dawn. Dawn, go ahead.
Good morning, CalSTRS board. My name is Don Gaddy. I'm the Deputy Superintendent with the Stanislaus County Office of Education. I'm calling in this morning to urge you to stop moving forward with this resolution and this legislation. We don't oppose trying to make retirees whole, but passing the cost on to districts right now is a hard pill to swallow. The governor's own Department of Finance has warned us of the fiscal cliff districts face in 22-23. Your proposal will add to the district's burden of trying to balance their budget on the heels of the COVID pandemic. Additionally, we think making the #1 priority of your staff to be the creation of timely, consistent, and reliable guidance for the field should be their #1 priority. We absolutely have to reduce the number of reporting errors that we're incurring. Finally, I just want to say that our relationship between the field and CalSTRS is not good right now. And when you talk to practitioners in the field, they tell us dealing with CalSTRS is like dealing with the IRS. Something's got to change. I ask you to do right by us and by our kids. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, our next caller is Andrea. Andrea, go ahead.
Thank you. Andrea Ball on behalf of the California Association of Suburban School Districts, representing about 500,000 students across the state and their districts. We appreciate the staff's write-up and the presentation. We have been meeting with representatives, but we don't think this proposal and the statutory change is the way to go. What we really would like to see, we want members to be whole, but we really want to address the real issue and have guidance and training so that when folks in the districts and the county offices are calculating the retirements, they have clarity on what to do at the front end so we avoid these mistakes. And we would recommend you not go forward with the legislative proposal now, but continue to work with us and within CalSTRS to provide this written guidance. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, our next caller will be David. David, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Board, for the opportunity to speak about the pending legislation. It seems to me that this legislation has the purpose of shifting the burden of overpayments to employers. And employers are not the enemy. Employers, when they are fined, when they are charged interest, when they are given a burden that is not totally their problem, it ends up going back to the classroom, cutting funds that could be used for students, for teachers, for the education of the students in the district. And we believe that that is an incorrect process. Employers are partners. Employers need help with training. They need clear communication. And we believe that CalSTRS has the responsibility to be clear with the communications, to train the districts, and to stand behind and support employers, not try to shift the burden to employers. So I urge you to not move forward with this legislation.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Patricia. Patricia, go ahead.
Good morning, CalSTRS Board. This is Patricia Smith, Chief Financial Officer for the LA County Office of Education. I would like to express my concern about the proposed change to legislation that would place the burden of overpayments for CalSTRS benefits on the employer rather than the employee. I appreciate the board's consideration of the impact on our employees, but I believe this legislation is trying to solve the result of a problem rather than the cause. As a county office, we do our best to ensure that our districts have the most recent information as to how to enroll and manage CalSTRS benefits for our employees. When we have questions, we contact the staff at Member Services for guidance. Unfortunately, even though we received that guidance via an email, when we are subject to an audit by the audit division, we are told that the guidance was incorrect, and both the employees' benefits must be adjusted and they must pay back the overpayment. The reduction in benefits can be catastrophic to some of our employees. These are employees who have spent their lives educating children. We don't need additional penalties and collections of overpayments. What we need is a clear, concise, and current instruction manual on implementing the regulations of CalSTRS so that all of our payroll staff are using the same criteria and guidelines to inform the process. We need an audit guide that directs CalSTRS staff to audit districts based on that same criteria and guidelines. Given this form of direction and training, if we make an error that impacts one of our employees, I will gladly pay the penalties, and then I will take immediate steps to ensure the error doesn't occur again. But if we don't know the rules and the rules constantly change or are subject to interpretation, we are always in a situation where our retirees could be hurt financially, our districts will incur undue costs, and our students will suffer as the funds for their instructional needs are diverted to unnecessary penalties. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Terry. Terry, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Terry Rupert. I'm a superintendent of Sundale Union Elementary School District. It's a small one-school district. As a small school administrator, like many of my colleagues, I have to wear many hats, requiring a lot of knowledge and expertise. This can be a daunting task if we didn't have the experts to go to talk to, and that's what we depend on for CalSTRS. And like you've heard already, that is an area of frustration because you can get different guidance on different areas, and then when you go to an audit, be told that that is incorrect interpretation. So I agree with our first speaker comment that it should not be on the back of our employees and our retirees, nor should it be on the back of the districts, which the last caller just said hurts our kids. The real problem is clear, concise guidance and communication. It can be done. We don't have the same issue with CalPERS. I will personally volunteer to help with that, but this is not a solution. It makes our relationship with CalSTRS even more difficult. And so I would ask that you would put this on hold and let's get down to the work. Let's not put it off one more day. Let's get down to the real work and get clear, concise guidance that will be upheld during the audits. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Brett. Brett, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Mr. Chairman and members of the CalSTRS board. My name is Brett McFadden. I'm the superintendent of the Nevada Joint Union High School District and also a member of the Small School Districts Association of California, SSDA. For reasons stated earlier, I too urge the board to hold off from sponsoring or introducing this legislation for the reasons stated. I'd like to provide a specific district example. Again, I'm the superintendent of the Nevada Joint Union High School District, a little over an hour northeast of Sacramento and north of Auburn High School District. We recently underwent a CalSTRS audit. We had 4 audit findings that we felt that would have been easy enough to avoid had we, however, had clear guidance and a clear audit manual. It was very difficult to work with the auditors, very difficult to get information from CalSTRS in order to avoid these audits. And so for the reasons stated through the testimony by individual employers and as well as employer associations, I strongly urge the board to hold off on this and instead work with us practitioners in the field in order to address this problem in a prospective manner. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
Good morning, board. This is Jennifer Baker with the California Retired Teachers Association. I did want to thank CalSTRS and CalSTRS staff for the tremendous work that they've been doing to meet with stakeholders and particularly for your audit staff in trying to educate us on the complexity of the audit process. the more we've learned from this process, the more that we have found various rabbit holes about the complexity of this issue, which is why I think you're hearing so many various comments this morning. What I did want to ask on behalf of CalRTA is that this item be amended to not require that retirees be liable for the 3 years of prior overpayments. We do acknowledge that this proposal is certainly better than what we have, but we do think that it can go farther and would appreciate if you would consider asking staff, if you do decide to move forward, instead of moving forward a comprehensive bill at this point, if you would instead direct staff to create placeholder legislation and allow us to work out these issues so that we can work in solidarity. We do have a concern that if there is not solidarity within the ranks of the stakeholders, it could jeopardize the ability to move this legislation forward, which would hurt all of us. And we certainly don't want that to happen. We do think that this is a step in the right direction, and we're hoping that we can find a very comprehensive path to move forward and address these issues, and appreciate the work that you and your staff have been doing to try to create that path forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Derek. Derek, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Chair and members. This is Derek Lennox with the Association of California School Administrators. We represent both active administrators as well as retired CalSTRS members, some of whom we've heard from today. We request that CalSTRS not move forward with this item today. We're at the table. We want to work on the underlying issue of employer reporting errors. As the data talks about that we've seen from CalSTRS when we asked how many districts would be affected by this proposal due to overpayments, the number was approximately 20% over the last 5 years. That's 1 in 5 districts that are having these employer reporting problems. And I mean, clearly that should be the focus of what we're trying to get at, because it gets at the issues of overpayments in the end. We appreciate working with staff on this for several months now. We understand the goal of equity for retired members. There are members too. And I think we can say very clearly from ACSA's position that if we had some of the reforms that we've talked about in our letter, which are really specific reforms, and we want to talk to you more about those, then we would be open to the idea of being held accountable when errors do occur. So we're not the party of no here. We're the party of let's actually collaborate on this. And as Jennifer just said, work on something that gets stakeholders together on the same page before going through the very public legislative process where it's more difficult to hammer some of these things out. I'm worried that rushing to the legislature is going to harm that ability to do that. And I'm just concerned that talking about we need to do training is not solving the underlying issues of changes in interpretation that we see from CalSTRS, like with paid administrative leave earlier this year, or CalSTRS just saying, read the statute to payroll staff, or the just-in-time guidance that we need and member account services has talked about, or reversing their opinion about the guidance, such as in the Walnut Creek precedential decision. So thank you for the opportunity to make these comments, and hopefully we can work together over the next year to work on this.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Sherry. Sherry, go ahead.
Good morning. This is Sherry Martin. I'm the superintendent of Kingsborough Union Elementary School District. We're a single site small school district in Tulare County, and I'm a member of SSDA and ACSA. As a small school district with limited fiscal and human resources, it is always our goal to be efficient and accurate in all reporting requirements. Accurate, concise reporting is in the best interest of our employees. It's in the best interest of the district's fiscal position, auditing outcomes, and in creating a positive work environment of trust and transparency. Just recently, our small school district reached out to CalSTRS to seek guidance and ensure that we had appropriate internal documentation to properly code additional work days for our certificated staff to prepare for this school year as a creditable compensation for their future retirement. We engaged via email with the CalSTRS analyst for over 2 weeks, and in the end only received their opinion on the matter. No statute, no official guidance. I'm very deeply concerned that in 5 or 10 years, there may be a different opinion during an audit. And then as a small school district, the fiscal impacts of that type of opinion during the audit could be fiscally catastrophic to our budget and our students in our small school district. I implore you on behalf of the small school districts across the state, please do not move forward with this bill at this time. Instead, I ask that time and energy be focused on providing timely, consistent, and reliable guidance for each and every LEA. We are all very eager to work with you to reduce errors and increase the accuracy of reporting. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Tim. Tim, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board and staff. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. My name is Tim Heyer. I am the Tulare County Superintendent of Schools and the son of a 41-year veteran teacher who is enjoying his retirement. So thank you on behalf of our family for your due diligence so that he can enjoy his retirement. I personally have experience in this area and urge you to put on hold moving forward with this legislation. Our personal example is most recently, we were involved with a school district in our county with an audit finding. And through that process, we did, in our opinion, our due diligence and worked with the STRS support staff in clarifying that what was proposed in the collective bargaining agreement would be creditable service and creditable compensation, only to find some years later that that opinion, as stated by Sherry Martin, was not valid and has caused retirees, both teachers and administrators, to have their retirement compensation reduced, creating hardship and ill feelings, and an imposition on an already stretched district budget. This is a systematic problem, and in my opinion, the proposed legislation does not solve the problem, only creates burden on school districts that ultimately could hurt our children, which we all are serving. I implore you to put this on hold, and as you've heard from CTA administrators, teachers, that we're all willing to come to the table and create a system that reduces the possibility of these errors, which would benefit not only all of the STRS members, but reduce the burden and additional work that would be created by these errors for the CalSTRS staff. Again, thank you very much. Hope you all have a wonderful and safe holiday.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you and good morning. We too are Jeff Baca representing the Riverside County Office of Education. We are telling the board not to approve moving forward with this proposal in 2021. My colleagues have made this very easy for me. I would simply align myself with the comments that you've heard already from representatives and staff from local educational agencies. I'll just emphasize one point and reiterate one point. We do believe that this is a symptom of a larger problem. We're eager to continue working with CalSTRS staff to resolve the issue of overpaid benefits. And just historically, this issue of consistent, clear guidance has been a problem. And we could cite numerous examples where compensation has been denied previously had been ruled by STRS to be creditable. So we hope not to try to resolve this in the legislative arena. We look forward to continue working on this, and we would respectfully request that you hold this proposal at the time being. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Holly. Holly, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as well as staff. My name is Dr. Holly Eads, and I'm the superintendent of the Orchid Union School District in Santa Barbara County, former president of the Association of California School Administrators, and also a member of CalSTRS. I'm calling today to request that you not move forward with this proposal to introduce board-sponsored legislation in January regarding recovery of overpayments. There's no doubt there needs to be steps to address employer errors. However, this proposed legislation is not the solution. Rather, I'd request that CalSTRS take the time to conduct a more thorough investigation of the underlying causes behind the reporting errors and identify steps that can be taken to address those issues. As earlier callers have shared, this legislation really serves to address the symptoms of a larger issue without addressing the actual cause. This is not just an employer problem. Both employees and retirees are hurt by errors. We work hard as a district to report information accurately, and employee training is not the whole answer here. There needs to be consistent information available to our staff, and there needs to be collaboration between departments at CalSTRS to improve this. The inconsistent advice districts receive and changes to interpretation and guidance without notice to the field serves to further deteriorate the close relationship between practitioners and CalSTRS. The lack of written guidance and the fact that two different departments, Member Account Services and the Audit Division, oversee these issues further complicates these challenges. I would request that this proposed legislation be delayed in the interest of addressing the systemic issues that exist. Let's address the root cause of the problem, not the symptoms, and find a way to work together on this solution. This is a costly proposal that does not address the true issue, and with Pension Solutions going live soon, it also could serve to introduce additional issues and more liability for errors. There's no doubt we want to work together, and we are all at the table when it comes to reducing reporting errors. Our efforts should be collaboratively researching why reporting errors occur, and this bill takes no steps to decrease reporting errors and distracts us from working together to find solutions. We respectfully request the opportunity to work together to find a better answer and address the reporting issues that do exist. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Elizabeth. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Elizabeth Esquivel with the California Association of School Business Officials. We greatly appreciate the time that our practitioners have taken to really share what they're experiencing in the field. We also agree that before introducing a bill that creates a new major cost pressure to LEAs, that the focus should really be on how to provide clear, credible compensation guidance to employers and their members. So we specifically ask that CalSTRS produce a point-in-time definitive interpretation of relevant statutes and regulations relating to the treatment of compensation. And when CalSTRS provides guidance to LEAs on how to report compensation, and CalSTRS later determines that advice to be erroneous, that error should be classified as a system error and not an employee error. When an LEA requests a statement from CalPERS to interpret and apply credible compensation laws to the LEA's represented set of facts, that they need consistent and timely answers. And we also ask that the employer audit report should be posted on the CalSTRS website. So again, we align our comments with what many of the people have already mentioned, that before introducing a bill and moving forward with this policy proposal, that we really focus on trying to get the clear guidance, and appreciate moving forward and continuing having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Orville. Orville, go ahead.
Yes, this is Orville Garrison, president of CTA NEA Retired. I take note of the large number of management and district opinions being expressed this morning, which seems to me are primarily intent upon shifting the blame or responsibility for misreporting and overpayments onto CalSTRS. Representing thousands of retirees in California and dealing with many of them through years who have been victims of this overpayment clawback problem, I can attest to the fact that it is not always, or necessarily even in majority, the fault of CalSTRS and its guidelines. Yes, there's room for improvement on all sides, but I can attest to the fact that in many cases, the error is simply an error that was made by the school district. Okay, we can argue who should pay, who should be responsible, But if we do not move this legislation forward, we continue to stay static, and hundreds, nearly thousands of retirees will continue to be victimized. We agree that the retiree should not be responsible if he or she did not make the error of having to repay anything. But this bill is at least a step forward in the right direction. We grow weary of saying, not now, not yet. Let us get together and talk. Take a pause. We'll work on this together. And yet the retirees continue to be victimized. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Candy. Candy, go ahead.
Good morning, board members. This is Candy Clark, Associate Superintendent of Business for the Alameda County Office of Education. Over the span of my 20-year career, I've had the opportunity to work with retirement pension systems in California and outside of California that were both public and private. By far, STRS is in fact the most comprehensive and complex system I've ever worked with. However, over the years, there are a couple of lessons that I have learned along the way that can reduce or eliminate pension reporting errors. First, there should be an investment in good communication. A local educational agency should have a comprehensive reference guide. When you think about it, STRS is a multi-billion-dollar pension system that does not have a written comprehensive guidance document. This issue leads to many questions that are often subjective and relies on the expertise of STRS representatives to provide guidance to LEAs. This is simply unacceptable as a means to provide good communication to participating agencies. The second thing that I've learned is that pre-audits are critical to reducing errors. Currently, STRS does not have a process to review retiree files before the first retirement check is issued. If a pre-audit system existed, such as the one utilized in PERS, many, if not all of the errors could be caught before the first payment is made to the retiree. If the goal is to protect the employee, and I agree that that's the goal, a pre-retirement audit should be a normal part of the STRS operating system. And last but not least, is simplify the system. I realize this is easier said than done, but I'm suggesting STRS consider reviewing the most common errors to determine a way to simplify the process while keeping the employee compensation intact. We'd be happy to work to do a deep dive on those common errors, and we're willing to resolve that issue. I'm asking that you consider to look at these ways to reduce the reporting errors before we apply an additional penalty. The penalty doesn't serve anyone if the goal is really to get the system to where it needs to be in order to ensure that the retirees are not burdened with such reductions in compensation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Michael. Michael, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Michael Holsizer calling on behalf of the California County Superintendents Association, which represents all 58 county superintendents. I'll try to be very brief here. We certainly understand the importance of the board needing to take action to preserve assets and minimize liabilities. We also very much appreciate the opening comments of staff in which they acknowledge the repeated concerns expressed by stakeholders that employers are, for the most part, not at fault here, and transferring liability to them just creates a new problem by addressing an existing one. I would specifically associate my comments with and underscore the great comments from Holly Eads from Orchid, and also Pat Smith from the Los Angeles County Office of Ed. We simply would certainly reiterate county superintendents and county offices of ed are very willing to come to the table, anxious to come to the table to work on this issue, but transferring liability from one faultless group to another is not an appropriate solution. Let's get this right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Our next caller is Kate. Kate, go ahead. It sounds like maybe we're on hold with Kate. I'm going to put her back in the queue, and then I'll try her again. The next caller is Deborah. Deborah, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, this is Deborah Batista Zavala representing Los Angeles Unified School District. We represent the largest part of the CalSTRS employers, and we would like more time to work on this item collaboratively at the table in order to find a sound solution to this issue. And we stand with those that have spoken here in asking for this item not to be pushed forward to become a bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We're going to try Kate again. Kate, go ahead.
Hello, this is Kate Lane, Assistant Superintendent for the Marin County Office of Education. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. We totally agree that something needs to be done about overpayments for retirees. These are teachers who have devoted their lives to public service, but we believe that the proposal before the board simply shifts the burden. It does not resolve the problem. The problem is that STRS does not audit retirees' pay before they begin to pay them and will not provide us with written guidance to ensure that we can report the information accurately in the first place. We would very much appreciate continued discussion to come up with a true solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you for your call. That concludes the callers in the queue.
Sorry, Harry, you're on mute.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah, yes, I am. Thank you, Samantha, for facilitating the public comments. Job well done. Thank you to the public for adhering to the 2 minutes each. Thank you to the people that and organizations that wrote letters that addressed to me as the chair of the board. I received them, I read them, and appreciate you taking the time to advocate your views. Thanks to the people that attended the Client Advisory Committee meeting on Monday. And most of all, I want to thank all of the educators, whether you're employees or employers, for the extraordinary work that you do, educating more than 6 million children and serving over 300,000 employees during a once-in-a-century pandemic. Nothing short of heroic, first and foremost. That's a top of mind for me. So thank you from the bottom of my heart as an educator and a dad. I really appreciate the work that you're doing during this difficult time. So the item is before the board for discussion and deliberation. And I'd like to acknowledge Denise Bradford. Denise?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you said, Mr. Chair, we've heard a lot in our client advisory meeting, as well as today, and letters from all stakeholders. I would like to suggest that we move this action item to November of 2021, and that we spend some time educating and talking to groups about the various facets of this bill. It seems employer groups still have some unanswered questions. I also think that everyone should read the bottom of TRB, page 6. I think that it's been really skipped over in the discussions, that the only reason we're having this discussion is because of an IRS ruling that was perhaps misinterpreted at some point. In the past, employers were 100% responsible for mistakes that they made. And I think that the 3-year rule is a good compromise, but I think that there's a lot of other moving parts with what has been suggested so far that we need to iron out among all the groups. As you know, we're a very collaborative model at CalSTRS, and we want to include everyone, and it would make much more sense to go forward with this legislation together and have it right the first time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Appreciate your comments. Controller Yee, Betty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur with Ms. Bradford's suggestion that we defer the legislation to some later period in time. I'm not sure what the period should be. But I guess where I would start here is just kind of looking internally in terms of CalSTRS and being sure that we have kind of our house in order with respect to how we're communicating with all of the stakeholders involved in this particular issue. As an office that does audits, independent audits, I'm very sensitive to this, that there is guidance and that the guidance is clear. And I understand that when the employers do request, written guidance, they're often referred to just, parts of the ed code, which just seems to me kind of an endless loop of trying to interpret what all of this means. And so, so my first question is, what is the possibility of getting some written guidance? And I think the issues, I think at least from the audits that keep popping up, are pretty finite as far as what the problematic areas are. So I think a focus on that as we continue to work with the various groups would be helpful in terms of how we can address those issues. I think around sick leave, special exemptions. I mean, it's the same issues that come up, from time to time, from audit to audit. But I wanted to just first get a sense of why we haven't had written guidance, and is there some, impediment or restriction to kind of issuing that? But that just seems to be a first place to start.
Thanks, Controller Yee. I see Jeff Zimmer's on. I don't know if that would be a question addressed to you, Jeff, or would it be Joyce? And I assume it would be to you.
I can start. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Yu. I appreciate the question. And this has been very educational, hearing from all of the employer groups and from the member groups as well. And I'm very pleased that we all have the same goal in mind. That motivates me that we can fix this, because everyone wants the same thing, which is accurate benefits of retirement. Everyone wants that. We have good training. We provide training, and there's a lot that we can do, I've learned, with some of that just-in-time guidance. And the difficulty is we're talking about outliers and edge cases. We have obviously training that covers concepts like creditable service, membership, creditable compensation, working after retirement, sick leave, the reduced workload program. We have a lot of training. And even in November, in this environment, we had 55 students from 42 employers take training in the month of November. So there is an appetite for the training, and the training is effective. We have great training staff. I'm very proud of our training staff. But what we're learning is that is one channel for the education. And it's not just about training, as I talked to the board about in September, it's about education. So what we're trying to do is find more specific ways to give just-in-time guidance and provide that. Now, will it be a written flow chart of if then do that? I don't know, because there's a lot of nuance in some of these situations when we get to the edge cases and the outliers. But we're definitely exploring how we can provide more confident and real-time guidance when we are provided questions from our employer partners. Thank you.
Okay, that's helpful, and I appreciate that. I mean, I guess I look at, with respect to how actions are taken in this area. So there's obviously the statutory provisions that govern the benefits, and so that comes from the Ed Code. But is there a set of regulations beneath that? I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the tiers of authority that could provide guidance to employers as to kind of avoid some of these situations from happening. Sure. And I appreciate the real-time education and training as well. It just seems to me that, and then the other thing, Jeff, if you could comment, just the communication between our benefit services and audits as well, because there seems to be some broken communication there.
Right. And I would respectfully disagree slightly with that broken communication. We work closely with audit services. Yeah, we have a team within my area, the audits resolution team, that partners exclusively with audit services. When we have a finding and an audit, we go and then provide education to that audited employer. So there's a lot of partnership there. It can always be improved, but don't get me wrong. But we work well together and will continue to. And I think going back to your previous question, there are, and I'll defer to Joycelyn on this in case you need some more details, but we of course have our teachers' retirement law, and then we have regulations. And the one that comes up most often is the creditable compensation regulations, which have been refreshed in the last little bit before my time in member account services, but I think the last 3 to 4 years. I may have that time frame wrong. But that's where we really need to get a little bit more clarity and provide the guidance on those creditable compensation regulations. And I hope that touched your question.
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, it suggests to me that perhaps if we all do some deeper dive in that we may not even need a bill and could just do a regular regulation change. Is that a possibility as well? I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Missy. I was going to say that the regulations may not need to be changed, just to make sure that we educate and train on them appropriately and clarify any questions that come up from those. And so, but I want to separate. I know that it gets very blended together because we heard a lot of comments from our employer partners and from the member groups about education and providing confident guidance. That's separate from the legislation about the statute of limitations.
Yes.
So obviously, everybody's going to the root cause, and I'm there too. I totally want to get to the root cause. Let's fix it up front, way upstream of the benefit. Let's do that. Absolutely. I think that's an evolution for us. But that's a little bit separate from this legislation that has some other aims.
Yeah,
So I just want to keep those things a little bit bifurcated.
Yeah, no. And the regulation is a partial solution in terms of how we address the problem. And I think more so prospectively. And I see Larry here as well. I mean, I will tell you that from my experience with audits, and particularly if we're trying to coordinate with, benefit services, that, you can imagine that from an employer perspective, as you're trying to get answers to a particular situation that comes up, and then if you can imagine that from employer to employer, that information is slightly taken in differently, it just does create some problems, which is why I think if there's some way to provide some sort of guidance, just even if it's foundational to where then the questions that are posed could be a little bit more, surgical and clean about what it is that they're specifically after, because it may be that it's not clear, at the time that they're making the inquiry. But Larry, you're on. I want to kind of hear your perspective as well.
Thank you, and I really appreciate all the comments today, and it's been very enlightening too. But in the last several months, we've been trying to reach out to some of the constituent groups and provide training with regards to the audit process. And in that process, whenever we complete an audit, before we talk to the school district about any potential findings, we have a discussion with the program areas. And so, member account services and audit services discusses each and every finding before we even speak to the district. And so we are in agreement at that point in time. Now, the district's perspective on that draft report is very, very important as well, because then it provides additional information to us, right, from their perspective. Anytime there's a disagreement with a finding, before we issue a final report, it's reviewed by our legal office, right? And so from our perspective, we try to be lockstep with the benefits area and the legal office before issuing a final report. And so we are doing, a lot of communication in that area. We have provided a circular letter that addresses our most common findings. And now, granted, that is several years old, and we're planning to do so at the first part of this next year after we conclude our next audit cycle, issue another, some guidance there. It addresses the most common findings, how to apply the law, what resources are available to employers, and who to contact at CalSTRS if they have a question with regards to any particular issues. But we're starting to do a lot of research right now. And if I could just share briefly, we went back over the last 5 years, and this will add a little bit of context to some of the comments that have been made here. And we've actually completed 349 audits and had 792 findings in the last 5 years. Now, we haven't completed our full review of these. We've looked at 299, so we still have 50 to go. Of those, 79% or about 80% of those audit findings were not disputed. And when we look at things such as responses from the districts with regards to whether information that they relied upon was from the comp guide, from CalSTRS, or even from their own county office of education, what we found is out of those 299 reports that we've looked at, 10 of them have cited, or 3% basically, have said, we relied upon the comp guide and it was, we tried to interpret it correctly and apply it. 4% of those, or 12 responses out of nearly 300, said that they relied upon CalSTRS, right, or a CalSTRS publication. 14, or 4.7, nearly 5%, said they relied upon their county office of education for input. And then this is the big one, 28, or nearly 9.5%, it had to do with interpretation of the law. And so that's really, I think, some of the biggest issues is when we apply the law and how it's applied. And so those are kind of the types of responses that we're receiving from the district. And I thought I'd just share that to add a little context. Much of what we're hearing are those that are the outliers, like Jeff said, and we can continue, and happy to work with, trying to iron this out and provide better information so that we can have consistent information provided, so that when we perform the audits, we rely upon that guidance that's given to the districts, and we try to do that, and we're happy to continue to explore.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then, it sounds like, and I really appreciate all the public comment and everyone who's been working on this issue to date. And seems like there's a commitment to definitely look at how we do better going forward. And but we do have this issue that's before us now. And I guess just thinking about the members and beneficiaries. So I think someone had made a comment about posting our audits and audit findings on our website. We don't currently do that.
No, not on a regular basis. The only ones that are posted on our website currently have to do with any pension spiking type of issues, and you do that for educational purposes. But currently, we don't post all of our audits to the website.
Okay, I guess just from an appeals right perspective, I want to be sure that our members and beneficiaries, we're doing everything to preserve their appeal rights. So I want to just be sure that we're looking at it from that perspective as well. So
I have been in discussions with our legal office on that, and we are considering that as part of this bill.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I want to just pledge my support to try to be part of a resolution to this as chair of the Audit and Risk Management Committee. I really appreciate all the parties coming forward and really dedicating just their time to just continue to work on this and hopefully come to a satisfactory resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Controller Yee, and thank you for the questions and the additional background that the staff has provided. Go back to the queue here, and Ms. Bradford has recommended that we put a pause on the legislation and come back for action by 2021 with support from Controller Yee, not in a formal motion, but that's the direction so far of two members of the committee. Would go through the list here. We have Ms. Higa, then Mr. Yamanaka, and then Ms. Yamamoto. So, Joy?
Great, thank you, Harry. And I also support the suggestion that Denise has made and that the controller has concurred with. Betty had a chance to ask some of the questions that popped into my head listening to the public comment. And just as a follow-up to some of the discussion around guidance that CalSTRS provides, I heard a couple of commenters reference the fact that they may sometimes receive guidance that maybe we're referring to as the just-in-time guidance, but sometimes that guidance then changes or an interpretation changes because of staff changes or different people at CalSTRS looking at the same issue. Coming from a heavily regulated industry myself, I think looking for that kind of consistency and reliability of the advice that you're given is something that's important. So I'd encourage us to think about that as we're spending some time looking at these issues. We don't need to spend time on it now, but one of the other issues that several commenters spoke about was also the opportunity to do a pre-retirement audit at CalPERS. And I I'm not familiar with what that is, or if we have considered being able to provide some kind of similar review at CalSTRS, but I think that may be something else, that would be helpful to consider, or that I'd appreciate an opportunity to learn more about as we look at this issue. And then finally, maybe just a quick question. Looking at the write-up, looking at the arguments pro and con, one of the cons is that it increased the cost of the pension solution project. And I wondered, I don't know if Cassandra or Joycelyn, if you could comment on that really quickly. Is that related to the specific costs that are referenced in the administrative cost and savings with changes in Benefit Connect and Business Direct, or are there additional costs beyond that?
That's the correct reference.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so I think, again, as we continue to look at the issue, if any of the alternatives or additional kind of improvements that we look to make addressing some of these concerns, I think understanding if there's an impact on things like pension solution or cost to the system, that would be important to look at as well. So thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Joy. Keith, and then Karen, and then Bill.
Mr. Chair, can I interrupt for a quick second? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, let's go ahead. Go right ahead, Mr. Ruffino.
Can I have the feature, because I cannot communicate with you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to raise my hand, but my feature is disabled. And I was trying to find Jonathan's phone number, but but since my principal is out from the call now, if he can admit me in, so this way, if I need to raise my hand, I will be able to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Frank. And if that doesn't happen, just wave to me and hopefully I'll see you as a backup, because I can see you on the screen. Thank you, Frank. So back to Keith and then Karen. Keith?
Yeah, we would be supportive of the board member Bradford's suggestion, motion, however you want to term it. There are a lot of issues, and I don't think we certainly don't focus on the trying to attribute fault, but there are inherent uncertainties in any bureaucratic system. So one of the things we would like to perhaps explore or have time to explore would be are there different ways of doing this that may involve some changes to the system, and there are trade-offs on that too. Maybe if there are, they may be too costly, or they may be take too long, or whatever. But at least some exploration of that, rather than perhaps accepting the current way of doing things and just trying to fit everything within it. There are elements of the proposal that are very that we would find very attractive, and especially relating to clarification of the various court decisions and the way they have interpreted the law. But within this whole context, there seems to be a focus on certain aspects of a global settlement. But I think it would be good if we take the next year or so and perhaps expand beyond the existing limits of discussion and explore whether other things are possible, mainly because the issue of cost is it's an overall cost to everyone, to the members directly, to the employers as well, if there are overpayments, and to the state, ultimately to CalSTRS, if there are overpayments. Anything that could be, if we examine our system to determine whether there's a way to reduce the chances, won't eliminate everything, but at least to reduce the potential for overpayments as much as possible, would be something to at least start work on and perhaps discuss in the context of this legislation. When I worked back at CalSTRS in the 1980s, this was a big problem as well. Perhaps the details were different, but overpayments were always a problem, a concern to the members and to the system. So it's a difficult issue, and perhaps this will help us focus on a bigger discussion. So we'd be supportive of at least a deadline of coming back, so there would be time for the next year of the legislative session to introduce a bill.
Thanks, Keith. We'll go to Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This issue has been really bothering me, and it's been taking a lot of concern. I've listened to the CAC comments, listened to today's comments, and I wasn't sure at this point what I was going to, how I was going to react to everything. But after hearing a lot of the conversation, I'm agreeing with Denise that more needs to be done. I concur with Controller Yee about the different information, and one of the things that I didn't really get a good answer is when Controller Yee asked about written communication, how realistic is that to have that in the next several months if we move forward with this legislation? And then Joy's suggestion about the pre-audit, I mean, I haven't heard about that. I would really like to know more information about that as well. And then also when Jeff mentioned Pension Solution and how they work, his unit works with the audits. As far as Pension Solution, the little bit of snippets that I've heard that the Pension Solution can do once it goes forward is that it will enable the districts to be able to code information, payroll information, to a more concise, with more concise information at the LEA level. So I'm in favor of having the talks, because I know that the stakeholder groups have met with CalSTRS groups, and I know that but sometimes that isn't enough. When you meet with somebody and all they're doing is saying, okay, thank you very much for your comments, and then not doing anything about it later, I mean, it's kind of frustrating on both ends, I believe. So I think in order for us to have a solid piece of legislation without, if we go forward now, there are a lot of concerns still yet to be solved, I guess, or are made collaboratively. I know the bottom line is everybody said everybody wants to do the right thing. Everybody wants to be able to serve the employers well. Everybody wants to serve the retirees and the actives well. So I think the bottom line is that since we all want the same thing, we can all work together to reach that end. And I appreciate all the comments and all the hard work that the staff has done and the time that the stakeholders have put in the information. And I believe that, we can come to some agreement, some collaborative efforts, some information that will serve everyone well. So thank you very much for the time, and thank you for your opportunity to be able to speak to this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto. We're going to turn to Mr. Ruffino representing the Treasurer's Office. Frank, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to express support for Board Member Breffert suggestion to table this proposed legislation. So, the Treasurer does support that idea, and wanted to thank also all the stakeholders for reaching out and to our office with their concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffino. We'll turn to the Vice Chair, Ms. Hendricks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to lend my support as well. I do want to just say thank you to the employer groups that spoke to us today as a board. I appreciate your voices. I do kind of share, I think that the key word for this morning is collaboration. And I am an active member of CalSTRS, a current active educator. with my my other hat on, and I have a lot of experience both as a member trying to understand my own pay, and then working with our district, which is the LA Community College District, to work with payroll to make sure we're paid accurately, and then obviously on the CalSTRS role. So I see really, it's really about members understanding. I mean, every month I tell members, check your pay stub, understand your job code, make sure you're clear on how you're getting paid. And if there's issues, you should go to payroll and work that out with your local folks to make sure you're clear, that you take responsibility for that piece. And then on the employer side, and I think there's plenty of issues that we've heard from members longer than today for quite a bit of time. We've heard educators, there's frustration at times with not having, the data that employers send to CalSTRS be accurate. And so I hear employers today loud and clear that the consistent, clear guidance that employers need. And I echo Betty's comments that all we control at CalSTRS is information, training, the audits, the work that we can do at CalSTRS to ensure that employers get correct guidance and consistent guidance. And I think there's work to be done there. So kind of coming out of this conversation today, it just seems like there's, we're back to, there's work that, members, we need to do as members to understand how we're paid, employers getting, I appreciate the voices of employers today. I would love to hear more voices down the road in terms of that. I feel comfortable having time certain of next year, November of 2021, to say, okay, we're gonna, take this time to have these conversations. But I do think a lot of our members feel like, we've had these conversations before, and we don't want to kick the can down the road without a time certain to say we will make a decision in November, whether that's legislation or a different solution. I think I know for myself, I am open to lots of different ways to solve these issues. But I do think there's, responsibility on CalSTRS, employers and employees to kind of get this right. And, but I also think, we need more action. And so we need to kind of get beyond the talk and solve these problems, because really at the end of the day, what I also heard today is it's about our members. It's about educators who have worked, a career and deserve a retirement with dignity, and to know that number that they get from us at CalSTRS is accurate. And that's not going to change, in 5 years or things like that, which we've heard so much in the audits committee. So I really appreciate today, the collaboration, the sense that we all have a part to play on our end at CalSTRS. We need to kind of do what we need to get things more accurate. And I really appreciate and support the idea of having a time certain, so that we're not just kind of kicking the can down, but November, 2021 to say, the board will come back to this issue. And so everyone on this call has that information. So I think that's a year from now, or a little less than a year from now. So I feel comfortable supporting, Denise, your motion. And but I appreciate the conversation today. I think for all of us, including staff, it's very educational, and appreciate the work that we need to do moving forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. So I'll try to summarize the comments and the direction that I hear there's clear consensus for. And before I do, I'd like to just comment on how important this dialogue has been. We cover so many issues at CalSTRS through so many different committees, including the board, investment committee, the subcommittees. But this issue literally is where the rubber hits the road. This is directly impacting our stakeholders, the employers and employees. So the dialogue and the resolution to this means a lot to all of us, because at the end of the day, this is really about the members that we serve. So let me see if I can summarize. And I know, Joycelyn, I saw you appeared to have taken down lots of notes. So the obvious is that there's consensus not to move forward with the legislation at this time. But there is a consensus around, for the lack of a deadline of no later than November of 2021, we will take action. that there is an expectation that action would take place no later than November 2021. Third is there were numerous questions or suggestions, and I think those were probably the notes you were taking, Joycelyn, is that I would expect that this remains visible to the board during the next 12 months, that we have visibility as to the progress that's being made or the lack thereof and the reason why progress is not being made. But let's be optimistic. We'll make progress with a commitment that resolution will be found by no later than November of 2021. Don't know if I missed anything else. I don't want to get into the specific suggestions because I think that's the visibility of the board where you'll be able to bring back some of the updates based upon some of the comments that were made today. Did I capture the sentiment of the board?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think Cassandra also wanted to chime in.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just respond to some of the recommendations and suggestions and asks of the board, and I appreciate all of that. One of the things that I wanted to respond to that Keith had said that when he was working at CalSTRS, that this has been some of these same issues have been carrying on for quite a few decades, but there have been changes and incremental changes throughout this period of time. From then, we instituted the Secure Employer website, which really improved the reporting that employers were able to report, and that really reduced our errors in reporting. So that was a big improvement. And then the PEPRA law, improved the compensation reporting, because this isn't unique to just CalSTRS. Reportable compensation has been a complicated issue in a lot of different systems because of special compensation, and so that did resolve some of the special compensation reporting errors, but there are still a number of different reporting improvements that we can make and partner with the employers, and the pension solution system will improve that even further. And we don't think that that's going to be the total fix, and we recognize that there is improvements that we need to make with communications and understanding the discrepancy between the units within CalSTRS if there's misinterpretations or different interpretations of the law, and how we communicate that to the employer. So we are dedicated to make sure that we convene a work group and look at the issues that have been raised and come back to the board to, with some more concrete recommendations that address some of the comments that we've been hearing from the employers and our members.
Thanks for that additional insight and commentary, Cassandra. I really appreciate it, and I apologize I didn't catch you you're in the upper left corner of my screen here. And I was looking down here, so Zoom world. Let me ask our staff, I don't know if Brian Bartow is available. Do we need actually to take a vote on this? It was listed as, Rosalind, this was listed as an action item. Clearly there's a consensus. It's been articulated. I don't know if we need to formally put this into a motion. Let me turn to Brian, if that's okay. You have two attorneys on the screen. There's two attorneys. And Bill, there's three.
You don't need to take action. It was teed up as an action item if you wanted to move forward, but it wouldn't be, if you simply voted not to move forward, it wouldn't capture all of your instructions. So I think you've given instructions to staff, and it's pretty clear. There's no reason to vote on it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, that concludes the item. And we're going to move to the next item, which is item 3 on the agenda, which is the Pension Solutions Staff Report Update. This is simply an information item, a check-in. And Prashant, I'll turn it over to you.
Mr. Chair, good morning. And
good morning.
And thanks for the opportunity to share the Pension Solution Budget Update. We provided a detailed report both as staff and oversight through the write-up, and I will be sharing some of the key updates today. Project team continues to operate in a 100% remote environment for almost 9 months now, and is making progress pretty much on all the fronts. Testing, data conversion, training, and employee readiness remains some of the key focus areas for us. I will start the update with employee readiness first. Employee readiness team continues to make virtual site visits due to COVID-19 situation, and those continues to be very effective. So far, team has completed readiness visits with about 67% reporting scores, up from 50% that we last reported in last board meeting. Those 67% source covers almost 95% contribution lines that we receive today. So team has done a pretty good job in covering the quite a bit of employers when it comes to covering the contribution lines overall. Employers' activity in the employee readiness environment is increasing over time, which provides helpful feedback to determine the progress of the readiness approach and the system testing as well. We expect to complete all the readiness visits by March of next year. Next, I will share some of the key updates from testing. I'm excited to report that CalSTRS has started user acceptance testing UAT for function rollout 2 as of last month. It's an extremely critical and important milestone for the project. UAT allows CalSTRS business areas to validate the new system before we go live. As I reported in last few updates, the start of the UAT was delayed due to delays in contractor acceptance testing by almost 3 months. UAT was supposed to start in August of this year, and we started this just last month. CGI was working to meet the expected pass rate in the system testing. CalSTRS team utilized those 3 months for the pre-UAT, a creative idea that team came up with to let business and technical users get their hand on the system much before the formal UAT start. This activity was extremely helpful, and it has positioned CalSTRS in a much better place compared to if the users were going to get their first-hand time in the UAT. So I want to congratulate both CalSTRS and Team CGI to get to this important milestones that we have been waiting for quite some time and making the best out of the situation we had in front of us. Testing will remain one of the main focus area over next 10 months. While CalSTRS is largely focused on UAT, CGI is working to complete the remaining contractor acceptance test activities and support CalSTRS with the UAT defects that we are going to find it. It has been a long journey and we still have a long way to go, but I can tell you that Go Live is more close than before at this point of time. Kudos to both CGI and CalSTRS team who continue to make forward progress in all the testing fronts. Next, I will cover the key updates in the data conversion area. Data conversion continues to make great progress. We are converting more than 2 billion records, and at this point, we have successfully converted 99.96% records, which translates into about 600,000 records are yet to be fixed out of 2 billion. So pretty good progress, given we still have about 10 more months to go before go live. Training is next one. The learning and development team continues to collaborate with the business areas across the organization on developing the training material for function rollout 2 for staff, employers, and members, all the 3 stakeholders for the system. Change management is another topic I do want to touch briefly. Building a new pension administration system is important, but it is equally important for us to ensure our staff is prepared to use it effectively upon go live. Change management is one of the important activities we have taken as an organization to support our readiness for the pension administration system. And change management is not same as preparing training material for the staff, for them to refer to or hand over to them, but it's about ensuring we are carrying our organization readiness in a thoughtful manner right from beginning to the very end. It means making sure that everyone continue to be engaged, understand the importance of this critical mission or initiative that we have at hand, and also to define how the staff role may change when the new Benefit Connect system goes live. So it's a pretty comprehensive and very critical activity for the organization, in addition to just building the system that will serve our long-term needs. Now, the next update I want to provide is on function rollout 3. As reported last time, function rollout 3 has experienced slower progress than expected since CGI moved some of the resources from FR3 activities to assist with FR2 system testing effort. At this point, CGI is trying to get back on track on this as FR UAT has started, and FR3 is certainly in a much better shape than it was before, but they still have catch up to do for function rollout 3. And so, as you may have heard or you may have read in the report, we certainly have made significant progress since we last reported. However, there are various risks that we are still working with, especially when it comes to look at our planned October go-live date for next year. Our board write-up covers a comprehensive list. However, I do want to highlight 2 of the risks for your. First one is on COVID impact. It has been 9 months, as I said before, since they started, and a lot has had to be adjusted, not only from perspective of where we work from, how we collaborate within and across team, but also about how we perform our job. Testing and training were the 2 main activities that were planned to be in person, and now everything is happening virtual. We can't even go to office. The big change for all of us. But kudos to everyone involved. They have done an amazing job in adjusting to the new normal and found new ways to get the job done. This has been possible due to the passion that our team brings to support this important initiative. But the other side of COVID-19 is the impact on our team members from health perspective, their availability to support the project or the initiative. And there are various challenges which have come our way, such as state enforced personal leave program, and the health situation is certainly one of the big one. So far, as a team, as an organization, we have been fortunate to have very minimal impact. But I have to say, in last couple of weeks, we have observed a little increase both in offshore and on-site team from this perspective. We have some people in the offshore team who are impacted. They are getting better, fortunately. I mean, there is no big loss. And same thing on-site too. We do have some situations, but the impact is still remain manageable at this point of time. But given we have over 250 team members supporting this initiative on both sides, and the infection rate is increasing in last couple of weeks, it remains a significant risk for us to monitor and be careful about. The second risk I do want to highlight, and the last one for today, is around testing. The big question is, can we complete user acceptance testing and the remaining test activities as per plan for October 21 timeline date? So what this means for CalSTRS is that can CalSTRS execute over 6,000 test cases that we have in our playbook in next 10 months? And for CGI, this risk translates into, can CGI complete the remaining test activities and address the defects we are going to find during UAT as per the plan? So as long as we are able to keep up with both the things, we will be able to hit our planned go live date. But there is a risk of all sort, I guess, as we are working on this complex project. So we continue to monitor the progress, and we will make adjustment as needed and as possible. That's the prepared update I had for the board. I'm also joined by Graham from Grant Thornton, Nick from CGI, and our sponsors, Ashish and Bill, along with Cassandra. We'll be happy to take any questions you may have for us.
Sure. Thank you very much for the update, Prashant, and the progress that the team is making during this extraordinarily difficult time with a very complex project. Let me acknowledge and please extend our gratitude to the team that's moving forward with this project, and certainly any of the risks that you identified, if they get heightened, I know you'll bring them to our attention sooner rather than later. I'd like to acknowledge Cassandra. I think you had your hand raised, Cassandra, and you're obviously an integral part of this whole project and been with it from the beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Keeley. I wanted to reiterate some of the comments that Prashant made, but related back to what Jack had said, and kind of make sure that we recognize the successes that we've made from the time that we reported on the project the last time and where we are now. If you remember, we were reporting the delays that we were experiencing in the contractor acceptance testing, and we were at a 95% pass rate was what the threshold we were trying to achieve to move into the user acceptance testing, we had readjusted our time frame along the way and had a time frame target of November 2nd was the last target that we were trying to hit. We did achieve a 99% pass rate and were successful at meeting that target, which was a huge success. It did take up some of our schedule contingency, and that's where some of our biggest risks are, is trying to maintain the testing success and the pass rates at the rate that we need it to go and hit the go live date in October. But hitting a 99% pass rate and above to enter into UAT was really a success for the team. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that part of the project.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cassandra. That's a great number. Any additional questions or comments from the board or any of the staff members? I do see Controller Yee. I'll recognize Betty. There you are, Betty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the update. I'm really just really pleased to hear about the progress and certainly the commitment to stay on schedule. I guess I continue to be alarmed by some of the observations and highlights that Grant Thornton is providing, and I'm trying to put that in context of the more recent activities and the assurance that we seem to be hearing that we're still staying on track with respect to schedule.
I think that Grant Thornton's risks associated with their report they're valid because the project is and I thought maybe Graham popped
Graham
out.
is here.
Yeah. When we're moving into UAT and without really little or zero contingency in the schedule, we have to be precise in our pass rates. I mean, we really need to be hitting those targets, and we're a little bit behind. I mean, we're not hitting the pass rates that we need to right now, and I think that that's some of the work that we're trying to dive into to see, what's the quantity of that. Are any of those duplicative test cases that we need to evaluate to see how big of a concern is this.
Yeah.
And then some of it also is relative to the project manager position being vacated for quite some time. And that is a risk, and that's in red, and that's, as Grant Thornton has noted. But that doesn't mean that work has not been done. We have had other staff filling in for that role to make sure that the project has remained on target. Nick Agrios, a consultant with CGI, has stepped in and has really been engaged. He's on screen here with the project. And then Prashant and his team have been really carrying a heavy lift of trying to make sure that nothing is being missed because of that vacancy. Now, it should be filled, of course, and that's what CGI has committed to do. And they have offered some applicants to finalize the appointment of that position. But I just wanted to assure you that the work isn't being missed because that position is being vacated. But Graham, why don't you comment on your perspective?
Yeah, I think you you probably hit the high points that I was going to make. I mean, the project manager one first, that's true. I mean, Nick, I think, has done a pretty good job of basically stepping in and fulfilling that project manager role for CGI, but he's not the permanent replacement, and it's not sustainable for the life of the project. So we do need a permanent PM. And I know there's a candidate that's currently under discussion with CalSTRS right now, so maybe we'll see some progress on that in the near future. On the testing side, I mean, obviously, we're all really focused on user acceptance testing now and how the next 10 months will go. And, I think Cassandra made the point that a lot of the contingency that had been built into the schedule has been used up to this point. So that does increase the risk associated with, if something else occurs that isn't anticipated. The good thing about user acceptance testing is that there's a relatively small number of metrics that really drive the tracking of it. There's really just 3 numbers you have to look at in terms of to judge how the project is doing. And we're starting to sort of, get those numbers in right now. So we'll have a pretty clear assessment of, how the project is tracking on a quantitative level. The other thing that I want to bring up, just something we'll probably start to talk about more in the spring, and I don't want to just forget about it. We can get so wrapped up in the numbers, but the thing I want to give recognition to is as we get through UAT and we're starting to, demonstrate the various business processes in the system, we're actually showing that the system works and it will deliver, the production, functionality. And that's what's going to happen progressively. So I've been sort of advocating taking a balanced approach of looking at the numbers because you're almost always behind That's just the nature of the beast, and you're always trying to catch up, right? And it becomes a bit of a, it can feel like a negative story, right? You're always trying to catch up, but there's a positive side to it too, in terms of actually demonstrating that the system is actually working now. But we're going to be paying a lot of attention to the, those factors in terms of the pass rate, the ability of CGI to correct defects and not have the backlog of defects grow, because that could be a major issue if that comes in after the holidays. And then obviously CalSTRS' ability to keep up just with execution. So, that's really the focus for the spring, and it's what you'll see us all, spending a lot of time talking about after the holidays.
Great. That's really helpful. So we have some anticipation of what to look for going into the early part of next year. Thank you.
There's some charts you're probably going to be seeing a lot of.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for all the great work, everyone, for stepping in.
Thanks, Controller Yee, and appreciate the additional commentary there, Graham, jumping in and your communication to us prior to the meeting as well in your role. I do believe there was a hand. I thought it was Ms. Miller. Gail, are you okay?
I am. Graham actually answered my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything from any board members or any of the other attendees on screen right now that want to bring anything to the attention of the board that you think we need to know at this point? Seeing no hands, look forward to the update early part of 2021 and continued good progress and rowing in the same direction. And certainly, hopefully we don't need to check in prior to then, because that would usually be a risk is heightened. So continued good work on the project and moving forward during these very extraordinarily difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we're going to take I think we could use a little break, 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:45. When we do come back, Sharon will facilitate the next item. And given the length of the legislation discussion, the next item will be reduced. It's scheduled for 60 minutes. I think it will probably be somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. So, and we anticipate being done before noon today. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we come back, Sharon will facilitate the next item.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Gail.
I just have to hop off for another meeting at 11. So can I just take a quick opportunity to say happy holidays and what a pleasure and a light this board has been, even in such a dark time. So just really appreciate it and really appreciate the next item and the information. And more than that, just the partnership and really the commitment to the state that all of you have brought have really been one of my highlights of an extraordinarily difficult year. So I just wanted to, I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say that quickly.
Continue if you'd like. Back at you.
Go on.
Encouraging. Back at you, Gail. We're fortunate to work with you, and certainly your role in the state is extremely, extremely important. And you're a light to us as well. So best to you and your family in the holidays. Stay healthy, and we'll be in touch. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back in 10 minutes.
10:45, everyone. Thanks. Okay, so we are back in open session and we are queuing up for item 4, which is our review for funding levels and looking at risks of the funding plan. And just for the sake of new board members, and I know David's going to give a little bit more of the history, and if you read the write-up, I thought it was actually a pretty succinct kind of breakdown of why and when we look at these kinds of things. But I just wanted to reiterate for the board that 2 times a year, we hear from our actuaries. In the spring, it's about the actuarial evaluation. And then in the fall, it's this report that we're looking at now, which is a review of our funding levels and risk. Those of you who've been on the board for a while, the funding plan in 2014 is landmark legislation for us in terms of making sure that we're on the path to full funding in 2046. And to me, it's the most central piece that we as a board have a responsibility to ensure that we move the numbers towards 100% over the years that we serve here. And I appreciate the work that actuaries do to try and just kind of highlight for us some of the risks and the issues. I think the write-up really explains a lot of those. So for the sake of time, David does have some slides. He'll walk us through it. This is an information item. So I just wanted to, we're not taking any action today, but it's a chance for the actuaries to just give us kind of a heads up on funding level, some of the risks to be thinking about. And then obviously we'll have some time for questions from board members. So with that, David, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Sharon. And I think I'll have Rick do a little opening comment before Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we understood that the review of funding levels and risk for 2020, we're covering the major risk that we see the plan has to achieving full funding. There are a lot of risks that we don't cover in the report, but throughout the year, we review as many different risks as possible. We keep track. And so we work on this all year in preparing this report, but we're only going to cover a few of the major risks. And in this discussion, we're only going to highlight a precious few. But if you have more questions about the report, you can contact us. We'll be happy to go into further detail about that. Over the past year, of course, the year has been dominated by COVID-19. We're not going to go deep into that. Enough has been said about COVID-19, but we're going to cover other risks in more detail. And so before we do that, we're all pretty happy about the upcoming vaccines, which actually gives us positive news, in the risk department. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David to go through the slides with you. And if you have any questions, just let us know. David.
Thank you, Rick. Jonathan, can you go to the next slide? And I just want to, as a refresher, Sharon talked about the fact that we present information twice a year. One of the, I don't want to say drawback, but when we present our evaluation in the spring, the information is almost a year old. So I just wanted to you to see again, what's our starting point? About 66% funded, unfunded liability of about 106 billion. And you can kind of see employers are responsible for about 2/3 of it, and the employer about 1/3. So Jonathan, can you go to the next slide, please? And what I first want you to show you was mostly what the events from last year. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We know what it has done to our investment return. We closed the year with a 3.9% return. That's about 3% less than what we assumed. Then we had the 2020 Budget Act passed by the legislature that actually impacted some of our contribution rates. So I just want to show you visually what those events have done to our projected contribution rates, which will help you kind of understand where some of the risks are also to our funding plan. Jonathan, next slide, please. So this is a chart showing you have 2 sets of lines. You've got some dotted lines and some solid lines. The dotted lines is sort of what we were projecting back in May when we did the valuation. So the orange at the top is the employer rate, the blue at the bottom is the state. And what I want you to see is the solid lines, what the events last year have done. So the Budget Act for 2020 mostly did this The whole purpose was to provide short-term rate relief to the state and the employer, and you can clearly see it for the employer, that now their rate's going to be lower for 2 years, and it's going to jump back to about 18% long-term. On the state side, what I mostly want to highlight is because of the fact our return was about 3% less than expected, 3.9%, if every time we don't meet our 7%, our assumed return, most of that burden falls upon the state. And you can clearly see here, the state is now looking at a long-term contribution rate of 9% instead of 11%. So that's the main thing I want you to see here. And remember, when we talk about investment risk, it's the state that will be most impacted by it. Next slide, please. So as you saw in our write-up, we're covering, and we've been doing that for the last few years, 3 main risks: longevity risk, investment risk, and membership and payroll growth risk. So as I mentioned before, when it comes to investment risk, the burden falls mostly on the state. So if we worry as a system, is the state still going to be able to pay off their share of the unfunded liability? Because of the limited rate setting authority provided by the funding plan, there's only so much room that we have in the funding plan to handle lower than expected returns. And what I wanted to show you, on the next slide, you will see kind of what are the lowest levels of returns our funding plan can sustain, where the state would still be able to eliminate their share and we can still reach full funding. Next slide, please. So this is when we look at the current, so this reflects the most recent valuation. It reflects the 2020 Budget Act, and it reflects the 3.9% we had last year. So if we look going forward, including this fiscal year, if we're worried about how low could returns get over the next little while to prevent us from reaching full funding, we're looking at a rate of about 4.5% for the next 3 years. So if we were to earn 4.5% or less for the next 3 years, we would not be able to, the state would not be able to eliminate their share of the unfunded liability by 2046. The state rate would go to the maximum where we would need to increase it by 0.5% each year, and we would not reach full funding. Over 5 years, 5.5%, and over 10 years, 6.25%. So that kind of gives you an idea. We have some room to absorb some lower returns, but there are possible scenarios where we may not have. So that kind of gives you an idea on the investment side, kind of how much room we have, if you want. Next slide, Jonathan. Now I wanted to show you about the other risk we want to talk to you about here is the risk of a decline in active membership and payroll. And here we're really looking at 2 things. So it's really comes down to because we collect contributions as a percentage of payroll, it's really looking at the growth in the payroll on which we collect contributions. And if you think about it, there are multiple things that could impact this. The main one is the number of teachers in California who are part of CalSTRS. If the number of teachers were to start declining, we would potentially see either a slower growth in the payroll or potentially a decline. But there could be other things like, what if, because of a recession, what if we see lower salary increases or freezes in salaries, lower wage growth? There are many factors that could impact this. When it comes to the number of active members, it could just be employers laying off employees or just not replacing them as a result because of attrition. One thing we're watching is the fact that over the next 10 years, Department of Finance projects that the enrollment for K through 12 would decline by about 7%. So we're going to be watching this. Next slide, please. So just to show you how the number of active members can move significantly from year to year. And if you don't see the right-hand side of this chart, you can just make sure you lower your video panel. What I mostly wanted to highlight here is the funding plan was passed around the time where we were at the lowest period of time in the number of active members for CalSTRS for the last 20 years. So this gives you a 20-year picture of how many teachers we've had actively working in California who are part of CalSTRS. And what I want to highlight is after the funding plan was passed, we had 6-7 years of just constant growth in the number of active members. And for the first time in 7 years, we saw a slight decrease last year from 451 to 448,000 teachers. Not a big decline, but just something we're going to be watching for because it could potentially impact our what we call the payroll growth going forward. So similarly to what we did for the investment return, kind of how much room we have in the funding plan, we wanted to show you also the same thing. How much room do we have when it comes to payroll growth? So next slide, please. So again, we've taken the same approach. We're looking at 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. So you can see, and when it comes to payroll growth, this is really the risk that the employers have to worry the most. Because we have a cap on the contribution rate that you can set as board members for the employers, the rate cannot be more than 20.25%. If we were to see lower payroll growth or even a decline in payroll, to collect the same dollar amount, we would need to raise the rate. And because of that cap, there is a risk that we may not be able to set the employer rate to what it should be to eliminate their share. So for us, if you look at the room we have in the funding plan, we could absorb up to a 1.5% decline over 3 years. Over 5 years, we would be able to absorb as low as just a 0.25 growth per year. So as long as the payroll grows a little bit over 5 years, we would be fine. And over 10 years, we're looking at about a 1.75% growth. And the board approved assumption, the assumption that was reapproved by the board last January when we reviewed the assumption, is currently 3.5%. So you can kind of see how much room do we have there. So that's the other thing we're going to be watching for the next few years. And now what I wanted to see, Jonathan, can you go to the next slide? What I want to show you is, so in the report, we showed you what could happen to the long-term funding of the system if we had, and we provided 3 examples of a recession in the report. We call them mild, medium, and severe recessions. In reality, there could be so many combinations of investment return and payroll growth if we have a recession. So what we did, and we wanted to show you graphically, is we ran multiple combinations of scenarios and we wanted to present them to you in what I would call a heat map. So if you've never seen a heat map, I'll show you. Thank you, Jonathan. So what you have on the left-hand side here, starting from the top left, this is our investment returns. So we're looking at the next 5 years only. So at the top left, you have our current assumption of 7%. At the bottom left, you have 0%. So that means earning 0 over 5 years. And you've got all the different combinations. At the bottom, what you have is the payroll growth. Again, on the left-hand side is our assumption of 3.5. And on the right-hand side, we go as low as it's a negative 1%. So it's a decline in payroll. And what I want you to see here are just these shades of blue that you see. Anytime you see something that's dark, a darker blue, you're looking like we end up in a pretty good place at the end of the funding plan. We're between 90 to 100% funded, probably 85 to 100% funded. We would qualify these as more your mild recession. So that's kind of the left side, the upper left side of the chart is where we would be. And you can see as long as we earn kind of 5% or above over the next 5 years, this is where we project we would end up. Then you've got kind of what we would call the medium recession. And that's to help you put past recessions in perspective. We've inserted them where they would land on that chart. So the early 2000s, what we call the dot-com bubble, probably more like a medium type of recession. If this were to occur again, we would end up probably somewhere between 70 and 80% funded by 2046. And on the bottom right of this chart, you have the severe recessions like the one we saw in 08-09. And this is where if we were to see something like this again, we would end up probably in 2046, we would still be where we are today in the mid-60s and potentially lower. So that kind of gives you an idea, hopefully visually, of how much we can absorb with respect in terms of a recession for the next 5 years. So we have some room in the funding plan. but we are, as we've shown in prior years, there will always be scenarios where the room or the authority we have to adjust contribution rate may not be enough. So that's what we're going to be watching over the next 5 years. Next slide, Jonathan. And that's basically all we wanted to highlight from the report. With this, I'll pass it to Rick to kind of talk about, if you want, the factors going forward, we're going to continue to monitor that could have an impact on, especially our future actual assumptions. Rick.
So if you look at the slide, there are 4 main factors that we see that could impact future assumptions. And we've talked about COVID-19, but for our plan in particular long-term, we've talked about lower inflation expectations. And so what we've heard from economists and others is that we expect low inflation to continue and even to be reduced. And that will in fact affect our possible investment returns, and it will in fact impact wage growth. So if both of those hit, then we would need to probably come back to you and to discuss what the next steps are. So we're going to keep a close eye on all 4 of these, but in particular the last 3 over the next few years, and we'll continue to discuss any major changes in these assumptions. So with that, I'm going to give it back to David and close it out.
And as a reminder, we continuously monitor the funding plan. We continuously look at our actual assumptions. And if you want, our formal reviews of the assumptions is usually done every 4 years. We just completed the last one last January. And they're done in alignment with the review of our asset allocation. And the next formal cycle where we will review all of these, it's currently scheduled to start. I think staff will probably start working on those sometime in 2022. And I think the board will start to see items presented to them. You'll see items probably, especially related to the asset allocation in 2023. And our current schedule is for the board to review and adopt a new asset allocation in the fall of 23, and then adopt new actual assumptions in the winter of 24. So with this, that's all we wanted to talk about for our presentation. We're more than happy to answer any questions you may have on our reports, anything else.
Great, thanks, Rick. Thanks, David. I will say there was a lot to consider, and I really appreciate, I think your job for us as a board is to kind of highlight, kind of the risks that we should be thinking about as a board. And then I recognize we have milestones along the way. So I appreciate you talking about the, that we'll be looking at the assumptions again down the road. And then the asset allocation obviously is going to be an important exercise in a couple of years. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll open it up to questions from the board. And I see Controller Yee. Betty, go ahead.
Thanks, Sharon, very much. Thank you for the presentation. And maybe these are a couple questions for Jack if he's on, because I'm just doing a kind of a look ahead near term. The first question, and I'm glad Gail is not here because she probably would pummel me for asking the question, but it is about whether we've made any overtures about to the governor's office or the administration about additional contributions for CalSTRS through the budget process. There are some additional one-time revenue, and just wanted to see if we made that overture yet.
And I do see Jennifer Whitaker is here.
Okay.
Yeah. So just FYI.
Okay.
So is that a question for?
I think maybe for Jack, because he's yeah.
Yeah, Jack, can you jump in? I assume you're listening, and can you get your video on for us? There he is. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, I missed that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay, Jack. I was just asking because I know you've been keeping just such a watchful eye over the funding plan, whether any overtures have been made to the administration, to the governor, about any additional contributions to CalSTRS during the budget, the governor's budget.
we have had conversations in terms of issues they are looking at relative to the revenues coming in. So those are, I'm sorry, I missed your question before. So those are ongoing, and we've been offering up to do some analysis for the administration on some of the proposals. Yes.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I think I just, the only thing I would say is it's clear from when I have talked with Department of Finance and others that they really are quite supportive of the funding plan. There's no efforts to in any way develop any weaknesses here at all. There is a desire to support the plan and make sure it stays strong. So I felt very good with the quality of the conversations we've had.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. And I know there's so many competing priorities. And then to, I guess to David, so the report, I guess, acknowledges that it becomes harder to meet full funding by 2046 if the investment losses are realized earlier in the plan. Can you kind of maybe, are you able to give a little bit more of a granular flavor about like in what year will it become almost like impossible to overcome investment losses or payroll declines?
And just to correct one thing you said, it's the closer we get to the end of the funding plan.
Oh, the end of the funding plan. Oh, okay.
Because it's more of a, think about, I think the best way to visualize it is if you're, view it as if you're trying to go buy a house, if you want, and you think about a mortgage. So right now, it's almost like you're trying to say, regardless of the house I'm buying, I want to pay off my mortgage by 2046. If you buy your house today, it's going to be much cheaper as a monthly payment than if you delay the purchase 15 years from now. 15 years from now, you'll need to have an 11-year mortgage rather than a 26-year mortgage. So that's sort of I think as we go along, the funding plan was passed with it was almost 32 years as a time horizon from the time it was passed to the goal of reaching full funding, 2014 to 2046. As we get closer to the end of the funding plan, I think at some point there will need to be a discussion as to should the terms, the parameters of the funding plan be extended? Because it's hard to fund a pension fund when you have a funding period that is finite. That is you also sit on the CalPERS board. At CalPERS, staff will come to you and make a recommendation for a funding policy, which just recently, a few years ago, it was changed to 20 years. So CalPERS has adopted this approach of having this, when we have an unfunded liability, we'll try to pay it off over 20 years. For us, we have this system where it's a declining period. Right now, it's 26 years. Next year, it's 25, then it will be 24. So the moment we start hitting 15 years and below, it's quite likely that there could be some events, like a year where we don't meet our 7%, where when you combine the fact that it's a short period of time and we can only raise the rate by 0.5%, it's likely it could result in situations where, now we either need an extension of the time period or the ability to raise the rate by a greater amount. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would say there will be a time, like maybe 5 to 10 years from now, that if things are still as they are today, that we may want to start conversation at least to have some ability to extend that end date of the funding plan.
Yeah, no, that's
many times. I think the funding plan works very well. Simple changes like having the ability to extend that end date would do great things to just our ability long term to provide a secure retirement benefit to our members.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. Yes, I did ask the question kind of backwards because I was actually thinking about a visual in my head when I was asking it. And then I guess another question to Jack, because it seems to me, we still have legislators who voted on this funding plan who are still in office. And I'm just wondering if we are using, David and his team's report to continue to educate the legislature about the importance of the funding plan. So to the extent that there may need to be any changes, they have continue to have a current context.
Absolutely. I did a briefing for the committee chair this week.
Excellent.
On David's report to assure them again that they understand the progress. And again, I always thank them because they have been so supportive of the fund. So I want them to appreciate the message here that we're on track, but it's fragile. And as you said, as the revenues in the state change, there may be some opportunity there.
Yeah, exactly. Good. And then this unallocated actuarial obligation. So what do we do with that? Like, are there things that we should be considering about how to address it? Or or have there been any consideration about how we address that?
Not at the legislature, but that would require legislative changes.
Yeah.
And would require outreach and discussion with our stakeholders and with the administration on.
Yeah.
Basically, it's all a matter of who should be responsible for this. And
but there have been no active conversations around that.
No.
Not to open up we've not I said, should we reopen that funding package to address that UAO? I think when Rick and I and David talk about this regularly, actually, I think we're watching the sizing of that very carefully.
Yeah.
And that will fluctuate obviously over time. And
sure.
I think the political risk of opening up a funding package when everyone else has financial issues that are part of our ecosystem here are a higher risk than us, moving on that UAO at this point.
Yeah.
So that's been my view is let's just keep a very tight eye on it, watch the sizing of it. And as David knows, I have talked to him a number of times about this very issue. But I think it's such a delicate balance, those political and perspectives on the funding package.
Yeah, no, I remember how much work you put in and Durham and the team, when that was all going through. So I very much appreciate the delicate nature of it. But no, I think keeping a watchful eye is exactly, probably where we need to be at this point. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Great. Thanks, Betty. Good questions. Bill.
Thank you. I want to commend the staff for the work they do in this area, because as far as I am concerned, I think this is probably the one of the foremost issues that we have to deal with, the funding plan, and being kept informed of where we are as fiduciaries is probably one of the most important things that you guys do, you people do. And in that regard, I was just wondering, because the risk factors in this day and age are a little bit more volatile, following the pandemic, I believe. You may disagree. And I was just wondering if it would be possible to have a, not necessarily an oral briefing, but maybe some kind of written report on a quarterly basis, short, where these risk factors stand, where you see trends, not that they would be determinative of any action, but just to keep us, informed, because, in my experience, I've seen that things can sneak up on you awfully quickly. And, to bring people up to a point where they're educated well enough to really truly understand what kind of action should be taken when action should be taken, is a little bit more difficult if they don't have a database that sort of keeps them informed. And since this is such an important issue to all of us as fiduciaries, if it would be possible, to have a regular sort of short written report, sent out to the board members, and so that we'd be kept up to date on what you're seeing as trends.
I think it's a great idea. David, couldn't we come up with a dashboard that kind of gives some monitoring to some of those key trends?
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. We certainly could. And I think I agree with you, Bill. It would be I think something that could be very valuable. Because as Rick and I talked about, some of these factors we're going to be monitoring for the next few years. Like if we start seeing that there's an indication and maybe we need to change some assumptions, I think it would help everyone if you could see how it has changed over time, and that it doesn't come as a surprise to people when we say it's time to change something, that you've seen all of the. No, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, we can work.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a good suggestion, Bill, because I do think, I think we've often say like how we organize our agenda or how we organize information on the board really communicates our priorities. And this is obviously, I think, our number one priority is funding the system. So perhaps myself as the vice chair and with the board chair, we could work with David, Jack, and team to kind of come up with something that would work in terms of just giving what you're saying, Bill, just a quick kind of here's where we're at with these risks. I'm sure staff could come up with a great.
Well, we do it in a sense with the cybersecurity. We have a regular report on the cybersecurity. That's monthly, I think, and I'm not saying monthly, but maybe quarterly or however you people determine is the best way to do it. But anyway, it is that we just sort of keep our finger on the pulse.
Yeah, no, it's a good suggestion. It's always a question around monitoring risk. I see Mr. Chair. Go ahead, Mr. Chair. Do you have input on this? Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I would concur. This is clearly the single most important challenge in front of the system and the organization is to monitor this funding plan. And I would support a more regular update. So we have this annual report that we receive currently. I don't know if it would be semi-annually. Maybe there's something, I guess we could talk with Jack and figure it out. I'm not sure if we need it quarterly on an agenda for a report such as this, but some communication and update that gets presented to us. And maybe this type of report is more semi-annually like this, and maybe there's two other communications. So I just want to get the balance of that right.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for that suggestion.
Certainly do that.
Let's go to Joy.
Great, thank you, Sharon. And I think Bill's suggestion is a really great one. So look forward to seeing how that evolves. And David and Rick and the team, thank you. The report that you provide, and also just the way that you are able to highlight information from so many of the data points that you've got in the report is always extremely helpful. And I think what really captured my attention among all the things you presented were that the heat map was helpful to sort of visualize some of the correlation between some of the risk factors that you talked about, but also just looking at the sort of time period returns and how dipping below some of those returns could affect would affect kind of where we are in 2046. David, you also did talk about, and Rick talked about our timeframes for monitoring and kind of revisiting actuarial assumptions. And of course, our asset liability study, which we completed last year. Knowing that so much of this, one of the big risks is looking at our investment risks. I guess I wondered if it would be helpful, in the investment committee to take a look at the asset liability study that we completed based on the capital market assumptions that were presented to the committee at the time, and consider, sort of looking at how what the current capital market assumptions are, and how, sort of what our asset liability study decisions are reflected using the current capital market assumptions, just to be able to sort of further educate all of us on how some of the changes are reflected in our asset liability study, and kind of continuing to educate us and sort of lay groundwork for decisions that we know and reviews that we know we'll be doing in the next few years. Chris, I see you popped on the line. I don't know if you have any feedback or thoughts about if doing something like that would make sense, or Jack or Rick or David.
Well, I'll just real quick to respond to that. Chris Salmon, Chief Investment Officer for the system, Happy holidays to everybody. The capital market assumptions, we intentionally try to do them over, we used to do 3 years, now 4 years. They do change obviously every year because they use the short-term 10-year bond, government bond as kind of their starting point. We can certainly look at it and see how it would change. I don't know, and it's up to Steve McCord, I know is listening. We don't know that it would radically change your asset allocation. It would just change the expected returns on those. But we're gathering everybody's assumptions that will come out in the next, I'll say 90 days, the beginning of the first year, and can at least run scenarios and give you an idea. But again, off the cuff, from my experience, it won't radically alter the asset allocation because we'd still want a minimum in fixed income. And it would always tend to tilt us toward risk assets, which I think from the last asset allocation, we kind of found a comfortable middle ground. So.
Yeah, and just to be,
jump on, do you want to add anything?
All I was going to say, Chris, is just to be clear, I wouldn't propose doing it for the purpose of, providing any suggested actions to the board for changing our asset allocation. I think it is just, potentially providing us with some additional information. And also, I think I recall that with some of the changes that we made in our asset allocation, there also were some, kind of implementation steps that we're taking in terms of how the pace at which we are making some of those adjustments, and curious if sort of what we already have embedded in our asset allocation and that implementation, if there's a different view in how we pursue that as well.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Joy, if I misspoke. We would present this as information item under the CIO report in the next, say, 3 or 4 meetings, just in little snippets of how the odds have changed. It's really what's more likely in the asset allocation. And we can bring up the interim steps that we adopted, just so you have a better understanding of lower for longer and how that impacts us. I guess in a phrase to coin Chair Powell, lower for longer means us, uphill climb and more challenging. I know Sharon knows climbing hills some. Steeper gradient. Which is
lower for longer. Scott, did you want to add anything, or?
I was just going to add the comment that I do think it's a worthwhile exercise. Echoing Chris's thoughts, it's unlikely to change the asset allocation, but it is likely to show that the expected returns have been reduced, just as the interest rates have gone down, and are likely to produce longer term a lower return environment. But I would say that one takeaway too would be how we execute, and the investment team is giving a lot of thought right now in terms of the opportunity set and how we can best invest alongside this environment if we do enter a low rate environment in the future, or the sort of the long term. How do we implement, and then how do we execute? What are the best investments? So I think that it probably, like on the margin, like Chris was saying, not a whole lot of asset allocation change, but I think it will lead to fairly significant changes in terms of how we want to think about executing.
Great, and I think it may not be a dashboard. It'll be sort of regular updates, as you say, Chris, in snippets to the committee so that we can discuss it. But I think kind of similar to the concept Bill laid out, just continuing to provide us with information and the public with information about how things have changed, how we're looking at the opportunities differently, not necessarily for committee action, but to make sure that we're all as well informed as we can be. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, John. That's a good suggestion as well. So, any other board members, questions for David? Input? I will try and just kind of summarize or sort of the takeaways that I heard from us. And again, David, correct. I appreciate when you give us helpful feedback, because I think we want to make sure we're all thinking about this kind of in the most helpful way in terms of doing our role as monitoring risk for the system. a couple takeaways. So again, just to reiterate and to Joy's point, investment return risk is number one still. I mean, that has been the number one risk. It continues to be the number one risk in the midst of COVID and a lot of the kind of short-term issues that we're seeing. Investment risk is still number one. So I think to Joy's point, it seems relevant to just kind of have things in place for the board to continue to kind of monitor that piece and how that might impact the funding plan. The next few years are really critical. As you mentioned in the report, there have been, changes with, kind of monitor, just the importance of monitoring the employer and the state contributions and just meeting their obligation. There have been some short-term changes, and I know we're long-term investors, so I just want to keep that long-term frame as there are a lot of short-term issues, including COVID, that are happening in our state, in our country, in our globe. We need to monitor those because the reality is, those kinds of issues, we need to make sure that they don't have long-term impact on the funding plan. So we need to monitor those. Keeping the lines of communication open. I really appreciate Betty's kind of harkening back to the legislature. And I remember those education sessions with the ledge when we tried to get this done in 13 and 14. So I think keeping lines of communication with the Department of Finance, who sits on our board, the governor, stakeholders, obviously, and then, the legislators, there's going to be new ones, coming in that will have to educate on the funding plan. So keeping those lines of communication open. And then I appreciated the highlight on some of the COVID risks. I certainly think those of us who are spending time with teachers are concerned about the number of teachers, and even the chart you showed about potential, who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And I honestly think the next 2 years are going to be really critical. And I imagine we'll get more information in 2 years, what state budgets are like, what district budgets are going to be impacted by state funding. This year's looking strangely positive, but that's a very short term. And we're long-term investors. What else? So I think, and then again, we're going to be coming back around. I appreciate the suggestions from my colleagues, from Bill and Joy, about things we can put in place to continue to monitor the funding plan. And then to your point, David, you highlighted that, basically in 23 and 24, we'll resume the activities that we do in concert with the investments house in terms of the asset allocation, looking at assumptions. So it's not like we're, not taking into consideration the highlights you gave around assumptions, but we don't want to make any quick moves right now. We really want to kind of think about this. There's a lot of volatility, if you will. And so it gives me a sense of comfort to know that we'll be looking at those issues in the next couple of years, as we always do every 4 years. So with that's a lot to digest, but thank you so much. We really appreciate the work that you and Rick do to keep us informed, and we'll work together. Harry and I will work with you to figure out some of these reporting pieces so that we can keep the board apprised. With that, I think I don't see anything else from the rest of the board. With that, I think we are done. So I'm going to hand it back over to Harry for item 5. So
sorry, there's one caller in the queue.
Oh, I apologize. My bad. We have time for public comments. Samantha, I think we do. We have 3 minutes per. Do we just have one speaker?
Yes, just one.
Okay, go ahead, Samantha. I'll hand it to you.
Okay. Our caller is David. David, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the reports. I think this is Dave Davini, retired member. I'm very happy to see the work being done by the staff, and this meeting today has been a lot about burdens and burden shifting and risks. And the thing that I think is missing from this part of the report is we are all in this together, and there is the risks need to be shared. CalSTRS is a partner. Its own budget seems to be going up year after year very steeply, and they have, I think the board has an obligation to share in the burden and to look at its own effect on the burden that is there. So that's my comment, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear it.
Thank you for your comment. That concludes the callers in the queue.
Thanks, Samantha. And that concludes item 4. I'll hand it to you, Harry.
Thanks, Sharon. Go right to item 5, and our Chief Financial Officer, Julie Underwood, will present an information item on enterprise risk. We have 15 minutes allocated for the report, so keep that in mind. Julie, over to you.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chair.
I see Phil as well.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, I'm Julie Underwood, the Chief Financial Officer, and I am here with Phil Burkholder. He is our Enterprise Risk Manager. And to continue our discussions on risks, we're presenting our semi-annual Enterprise Risk Management Report as of September 30th. Now, this report provides information on the oversight of CalSTRS management of risks at the enterprise-wide level. Now, just wanted to remind you that we did modify our semi-annual report that was presented to you back in May. Now, that reflected both risks and issues that we were facing at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it did not include our normal heat map and risk score report. So therefore, the period over period reporting that Phil will discuss shortly with you includes changes in the risk scores from the September 2019 semi-annual report. I also wanted to mention that during this reporting period, we did complete our annual risk and internal controls awareness online training, as well as our branch risk assessments. And we also added an 11th risk category for third-party risk, which Phil will provide more details on. So I will now turn it over to Phil to present the highlights of the semi-annual report. Phil?
Good morning. As Julie said, my name is Phil Burkholder. I'm your ERM manager. This report contains a narrative that describes and summarizes the 2 attachments. The first attachment is a heat map shown on TRB 67, which is a high-level depiction of CalSTRS' current inherent and residual risk enterprise risk landscape. The second attachment is the risk score report, shown on TRB 68 through 73, which is a more detailed view of the inherent residual risk scores for each of the risk categories and their associated sub-risks. I would like to focus our discussion this morning on just the heat map and specifically on the risk categories that are either higher rated or that have shifted over the reporting period. As a reminder, the heat map shows 2 risk ratings for each category, an inherent score, which is the risk without the benefit of mitigations, and the residual score, which is the risk that is left after our mitigation efforts. Overall, there are 4 higher rated risk categories and 4 risk categories that shifted over this reporting period. The risk categories where the ratings didn't change are lower rated risks and have been reviewed by staff who determined a rating change was not required at this time. Additional details for all of these risk categories are included in the narrative of this board item. So focusing on the heat map, which is on TRB 67, the first category I'd like to focus on is category 4, pension administration. As you can see, this category is currently rated at a medium residual risk rating. The risk category is focused on our ability to pay our members timely and accurately using the current pension administration system, which is START. There are several components at play in this category. The first of which is the stability of START. And the second being the timeliness and accuracy of our contributions and data we receive from our employers. We have been monitoring both of these closely during the pandemic and have not seen where they've been negatively affected. So as a result, there was no change to this risk category. Moving to our right to the category 5, financial reporting. This risk category's inherent risk score shifted down 2 points, while the residual risk score shifted down 3 points. Now, these changes were the direct result of us removing a sub-risk. We removed the sub-risk because there was a successful transition and satisfactory performance of our maintenance and operations vendor who is responsible for maintaining CalSTRS financial reporting system, Business Direct. Moving a little further right, for category 6, pension reform, this risk category shifted down 3 points to reflect the California Supreme Court ruling in the Alameda County case, which kept the essence of the California rule intact. So there was no change in this area. Continuing to your right, you will see our highest rated risk category 7, information security. This category has always been our highest rated risk category, and we don't see that changing anytime in the future. The ISO has been very successful, even in this remote working environment, and continuing to maintain our mitigation efforts, and they do not believe any rating shift was necessary at this time. They intend to continue with their mitigation efforts with a focus on improving remote security and support. So moving on to the operational risk category number 8, which is our single biggest risk category in terms of sub-risks, there was a 4-point shift upwards in inherent risk and a 1-point shift upwards for residual risks. These shifts were the result of adding 2 sub-risks and removing of another. We added the first sub-risk to recognize the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak and its effects on operations related to providing ongoing service to our members, performing core business functions, and supporting our remote workforce. We added another sub-risk to recognize the risk of not being able to provide the resources needed to fully execute the Pillars project, which is necessary to support the collaborative model. We did remove 1 sub-risk, and it was focused on the inability to provide parking at the headquarters due to space constraints in the existing parking garage. As you can expect, that's really not an issue right now in our current environment. I did want to mention the HQE project. It's normally part of this risk category, and as you know, it continues to be on schedule. Staff continue to monitor the supply chain and the status of the construction permits. Moving right to the transformational change risk category 10, there is a 1-point shift upwards in the residual risk here. This shift reflects both the delay in the contractor acceptance testing for the pension solution project and staff shifting to remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic. As you just heard in the pension solution project update, staff continue to closely monitor the project deliverables for any downstream impacts. All the way to the right, you will find our last and our newest risk category, number 11, third parties. After 18 months of collaboration across the organization, we are introducing this risk category to recognize CalSTRS dependency on third parties to perform services on our behalf. Although this category has one of our higher residual risk ratings, staff are confident that the mitigation efforts can be effectively control this risk, which we will monitor very closely as we continue to build out this risk category. Overall, I just want to say, staff continue to monitor organizational progress on strategic plan initiatives, any budget constraints, and overall effect on the events of the strategic goals. In our opinion, the enterprise risk levels continue to be adequately managed and mitigated. The organization has fared well during this pandemic due to the mitigation plans it already had in place or developed shortly after the onset of the crisis. And with that, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks for the report. I personally found the report quite of high quality, especially the charts, the color coordinated. So it was really helpful. So let's go to questions or comments from committee members. Bill?
Thank you. And I think I can just endorse what Harry said about the report. It's very informative and well presented. Thank you very much, Julie and Phil. Just one issue, Sharon and I serve as the liaison for the board, along with Harry, on the headquarters expansion. And to the extent that it has been going on along on budget and on time, maybe Jack, if you could address that one issue that we've been closely monitoring over the last few months with the fire marshal for the full board, so that we might have a little bit more transparency on what's going on.
Absolutely, and it most definitely is the single greatest risk on the project right now. We are there's different phases to these permits, and those different phases are still under consideration by the fire marshal's office. But I will say, this is a timely conversation. There have been meetings all this week between our construction staff and the fire marshal's office. So we have been able to actually have live conversations between the organizations, and there is some movement on the earlier phases, where we do not have approval of the final phase yet, which gives us really authority to move forward on some of the interior work. But we first had to get final approvals on the first phases And there is some positive developments there, absolutely, this week. But we will have to come back to you, and particularly you and Sharon, on our interim reports on that final phase. Just so you know the dollar number, if we have a drop dead date on that from our view on the construction schedule relative to that final permit, and to the extent we go past that date, the cost of the organization is probably in the range of $70,000 to $90,000 a day. So we are going to watch those dates very carefully, but some positive development for sure.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Bill. Anything else? Seeing no. Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks for bringing the visibility of that issue before the entire board. Most helpful. Don't see any other hands. Again, Julie and Phil, thanks for the terrific report. We look forward to the next semi-annual enterprise risk report in 6 months.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay healthy. Happy holidays. 6A and 6B are consent items. Karen, do we have any amendments for these minutes? Are we okay to go? We're okay to go? Okay, so seeing no hands, those consent items have moved forward. There are no items referred for the board, which is item 7. There's no new business. Item 8. Item 9 is the draft agenda for our January meeting. It's quite light and primarily informational. If that changes, we'll certainly update you in advance. Statements for the public. Samantha, do we have any members of the public that would like to address the board?
There are no members of the public in the queue.
Okay, looking at the time, considering we took 30 minutes for public comments at the beginning to hear from the employers and the employees on the proposed legislation and the 10-minute break, I think we came in pretty good, like in terms of actual on time, on screen, 2-hour interactive. So thanks everyone for a really productive meeting. Stay healthy. Miss you all.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see everybody in person sometime in 2021. Best of holidays to you and your families. I think this holiday season will have a very different meaning for so many of us around the globe. So it's great to be with you today, and thanks for everyone's dedication. It's great to be of service with one another and with each other and have such purpose. So that message is for the entire staff as well.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Take care.